Eddie Price is a retired high school and college history teacher, and I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of years ago in Hallsville at the Steamboat Festival. It was Susan Reynolds that suggested that I contact Eddie, and we're so glad to have him here this morning. And he's going to be talking to us about Cane Bridge. Are you all familiar with what happened at Cane Bridge? If you're not, that's okay, because he's going to tell us.
The Second Great Awakening.
The Second Great Awakening in this country. So Eddie, I'll give the mic to you.
All right. Can you hear me like this?
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold the microphone, I don't think. So, I don't think
We
it'll
have one
be...
request. One person that can't hear very well. If you
Okay.
can put it around your neck.
Well, we'll do it then.
Okay.
Take this hat off. How's that? All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, my name is Eddie Price. I grew up in Davis County, went to Philpott Elementary School, and then back then when we missed snow days, it was an act of God. You didn't have to make them up, but now you do. So I don't know what the school systems will do. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm retired. I taught for 36 years, 31 at Hancock County High. I taught 2 years at a Catholic school in Whitesville, St. Mary of the Woods. I substitute taught for 3 years, and then I ended up at Hancock County thinking I would come back to Davis County, come back home. I didn't do it. I liked it so much up there, I stayed, and now I live there. But 36 years was enough, and I published my book, Winter's Landing. And of course, it's a historical book, because I was a history teacher and I love history. But it's about Kentucky in the years 1811 to 1815. And when I started doing the research for it, I knew what I wanted to do with the book. But as I started, writing it and putting these characters in that book, and in the story, and started grafting in what they were living, what they were thinking, how they preserved their food. I mean, generally you had to kill it and grill it. You had to smoke it, preserve it, salt, cure it. You had to dry your foods. They didn't have canning in America at that time. So all of how they lived was really something. And as you get into this, you'll realize how much work and how much hardship, went on for these people. How just getting a meal, and you had to take care of all of your animals. You had to cut the fences, the wood to lay the worm fences. But, in all of that, you also had to consider what was your faith at that time? How close were these pioneers to nature? How close when they looked at signs? Those of them that didn't have preachers, they knew they needed something more. So I got to writing this book, and it really, it hit me here. And I think the historical part of it has really appealed to the colleges and the universities. But I've had people read it for just pure enjoyment. And it's in a 4th printing. I think, yep, I've got the gold medal on the back. I'll show you some pictures real quick. I do other talks. I do a reenactment of Kentucky in the War of 1812. I found out that Kentucky lost 64% of all of the Americans killed in the War of 1812. There were 17 other states. We lost 64% of the killed. And not one battle was fought in Kentucky. And this young man in my book, he's a gunsmith who comes to Kentucky from Pennsylvania, and he is wrestling about war, the issues of war, the rightness of it, plus the leaving his wife and his kids and his farm and his work, like so many of our soldiers have to do. even today. But I dress like this sometimes. The book won, the Daughters of 1812 fell in love with it, and they gave me the Spirit of 1812 Award. And I got that up in Michigan when I did a talk at the Battle of the River Raisin, the 200th anniversary. The Senate, I've got a state senator's comments on the back and of the book, and he had me up at Frankfurt, and the book was honored by the Senate. And they told us we had to go over and meet the governor. So there's Governor Bashir right there. When you come up and look at the pictures later, you'll see he's got a big red eye. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's got pink eye. I shook hands with him. I didn't want to touch my eyeballs, so I washed my hands. He had had laser surgery. It wasn't pink eye. But teaching in the schools, you get a little bit wary. Here I am at Fort Meigs, Ohio with a group of reenactors. And, you know, they like guns and things that go bang. And I do too, so they dress up and play Army. But they're really involved in the history and the sacrifice of our country. And I've just recently joined the SAR, the Sons of the American Revolution. We try to keep that, you know, our heritage in front of our kids, which is so important. I have here, the book got the gold medal for Best Historical Fiction. And that was at the Reader's Favorite Awards at the Miami Book Fair. And I beat out 3 Americans, an English, Indian, and a Canadian. So it was really nice to get this international award for the book. And I am a Davis County author, you know, so it's nice to, I'm still trying to go outside of the state and convince everyone that our state slogan is not 3.5 million happy people and 15 last names. I'm trying to convince them that our most popular greeting card is not happy birthday Uncle Dad. Anyway, you know, it's hard to do. I do take this out to the schools. You know, I take the program to the elementary schools and at Lindsey Wilson College, and Lindsey Wilson has asked me to come back for the Cane Ridge Revival, as has the Kentucky Christian University. I go there next month as well. That's all the way in the eastern part of the state. And they're really interested in the Cane Ridge Revival. But there's some pictures from the Slider Recital Hall in Columbia, Kentucky. And real quickly, this is you may have got your Kennergy newsletter back in March of 2013. That's how I get advertisement. My publisher is really pleased at my marketing. I'm going to leave the reflexive, you know, you can draw conclusions. But he's real happy at what I'm doing to get the book out there. But I'd like him to do a little more. We are in a 4th printing at Acclaim Press. I do have some 4th print editions here if anybody's interested. But tonight, or today, I'm going to talk to you about the Cane Ridge Revival in Kentucky. Now, my young man, Craig Ridgway, a 21-year-old gunsmith's apprentice, loses his job. His gunsmith, the master gunsmith, dies, and he ends up walking across Pennsylvania to find work. And he ends up at Pittsburgh, and at one of the 2 iron foundries that were there. At Pittsburgh at the time. He sees the steamboat New Orleans being built, and the year is 1811. What a phenomenal year for anybody living in that time period. He comes down the Ohio River, catches pneumonia, and ends up on the farm of the Widder Fuquay, hence the title Widder's Landing. You know, Kentuckians, that's a widder is a woman that's lost her husband. We put our heads on pillars when we go to sleep. You know? But he ends up living or there. Many people think that the widder, and she was a horrid monster. She looks like a monster. You know, she's distorted with tumors and warts, and she's got one tooth sticking out, and she's horrid, and she's filthy. and she ran a prostitution den, a liquor vault, and a gambling joint for years. Outlaws went out from her cabin, and travelers going down the Ohio knocked in the head. Very similar to what happened at Cave and Rock. You know, they were bandits. I mean, the law here was not good. Craig is there. She nurses him back to health. She wants a worker for her farm. And his innocence and her jadedness are, you know, it's really comical, especially when she takes him into the settlement of Cottonwood Bend, Cloverport, and gets him some new clothes. And it's hilarious. But people regard him as a pariah, like she is. When she dies, he's struggling to fit in with that community. He thinks he's going to leave. There's a Catholic priest in the area that finds out he treated her better than anyone else in the whole community. He said he was closer to what Jesus would have had. He took the worst human being and actually helped her through her time. She was dying when he got there. She gets him well, and she tells him, I'm going to tell you something, you're going to make it, and I ain't. And said, and he ends up, he's there with her when she dies. And the Catholic priest tells him, look, this boy doesn't know much about farming. Now, she teaches him how to farm, plow with mules, and do all of the farm work, and he really falls in love with Kentucky and the seasons. And there's a giant comet in the sky in 1811. I'll tell you more about that. But the priest tells people, get out there and help him. His tobacco needs topping. He needs to have some help. A storm had blown his barn over. We need to help this young man out. So he struggles to be accepted in the community. He has a friend who is a Mennonite who had been shunned from a group that came from over in Indiana because of his foul mouth. And so he ends up, he's a carpenter, and these two sort of fall together. He gets caught up in the evangelism of that early 1800s period. And he tells him, meanwhile, Craig is falling in love with a Catholic girl. And he's telling him, don't get messed up with those Catholics. He said, they're not right. And he tells him all these horror stories about the Inquisition and war and why you don't want to be a Catholic. And he says, you've got to come to one of my brush arbor sermons that was sweeping Kentucky at that time. And Craig ends up, he has to make a deal with him, and he goes to a brush arbor sermon. That's where we're going here. Because brush arbor sermons, camp meetings, and tent revivals grew out of the Cane Ridge revival. And so Craig ends up going there and seeing some incredible phenomena that went on. Just like it did at Cane Ridge. In fact, preachers got up and they had their deacon or their song leader say, Lord, after they did all the introductions, they'd say a prayer, and they would say, Lord, make it like you did at Cane Ridge. They were saying that all the way up into the 1900s, late 1900s. I went to Crofton Christian Church and did a presentation, and I said that, and this lady said, I used to say that when I was a little girl. And I said, yeah, And some people said, I've been to Cane Ridge, the meeting house. Did you know it's one of the 10 most places you must see in Kentucky? And I've got some brochures you can take around. And you ought to go up there. You'll see some pictures here. And is it possible, can we cut off one bank of lights? Just the first bank, I think, would do. But what I'm going to do is I will tell you that during the 1800s, and you'll see that if you decide to read the book, and it sounds like we might be getting a blizzard. You might want some reading material. It's probably, I shouldn't say that. But when you get in there and you see that comet of 1811, that comet was almost as brilliant as Halley's Comet. When you looked in the northwest quadrant of the sky, this thing was 25 degree arc. Its brilliance and magnitude of light 10 times as bright as the moon. He said you could easily read the Kentucky Gazette by its light. I mean, that's something. People thought comets were bad news. The Babylonians, way back in ancient 2250, They say comets are going to bring destructive forces in nature and war. They thought that in ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, the medieval period. Well, they thought it back in this time and day. We had a comet appear in the sky out of nowhere. It was called Hale-Bopp back in the late 1990s, I think. And this educated scientific community saw that, and they all went into a room and committed suicide. And that was in our day.
I remember that.
So, you know, comets were considered omens of bad things to come. Napoleon's troops saw it right before he went into Moscow. And they said, don't go in there, because if you do, you're going to get beaten. His whole army was just annihilated. And he came back and lost his first major set battle at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations. It began his downfall. In America, can you imagine what people were thinking then? Without the bright lights and all the things we have today to distract us, and they saw this comet. What does it mean? People said, we're going to get destructive forces in nature. We're going to get war. Well, we got destructive forces in nature. In 1811, we had the first of 4 gigantic New Madrid earthquakes. So powerful that it happened on the other side of the Mississippi River, but it cracked sidewalks in Washington, D.C., rang church bells in Philadelphia and Boston and Upper Canada. So you can imagine how powerful it was. The river actually experienced this huge inland tsunami called a seiche. It rose 20 feet at least in the air. A sailor said he saw a wave bearing down on them like nothing he had ever seen at sea. And they said that it raced backwards. They had to hold their hats on. The river was going back faster than a horse could gallop. We have New Madrid earthquakes being created. Whole square miles of soil liquefying and forming new channels for the Mississippi River. That had to be an incredible time. And America gets war, the War of 1812. So you can imagine, when I was teaching school, if ever I had a moment that I thought was a teachable moment, I jumped on it. I was going to say, all right, this is where we can use this. Preachers were saying, look at that comet up there in the sky. What do you think that is? It's God's chariot of fire. An angel, censer of fire. He's going to hurl it down here. And they cherry pick out of Revelations and say, you're going to see, great earthquakes and pits opening up. And of course that happened down here. They said big sulfur pits and noise. And the heavens themselves were just rent with lightning and all kinds of things, that these charges that were being built up. I had to read a lot about earthquakes to learn how that worked. But you can imagine when they said there will be earthquakes, and then there were after the comet. There will be war. We have a war hawk in Congress right now, Henry Clay, who had just been elected in 1811 as Speaker of the House, leading a new faction called the War Hawks, Felix Grundy of Tennessee. So you can imagine all these things coming together, and preachers, see, I told you so. You better get in here now. This is the last chance. It's the end of time. And so people were, not only were they scared, and yes, attendance skyrocketed, but people also were hungry for something they didn't have on the frontier. And the Cane Ridge Revival was the catalyst. It really brought that into action. So now, I'm going to take you back to 1801, to the time of Cane Ridge, and tell you what went on at that great revival. Cane Ridge was a major event for Kentucky, but for all the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. And it changed people's lives forever. Let's see if we turn it that way. Pioneers didn't have this stuff. So the Great Awakening, actually, you have to go back a little bit in time to see how the Cane Ridge Revival happened in Kentucky. Cane Ridge Revival was one of the top 5 singular transformational events in Kentucky's history. It changed the direction of Kentucky. It truly changed socially, culturally, and religiously how people thought in Kentucky. And it got its start way back in what was called the Great Awakening. And we talk over here in America about the Second Great Awakening. There was a Great Awakening, the first one, just like the Great War and World War II. So you had to have one to have the other. And it happened way over there in England, in Scotland, in Wales, where people didn't have a lot of preaching going on. And the Anglican Church, many people thought that stuffy old Anglican Church with its forms and its order of service wasn't doing enough to reach people. So you got to get people, get out and do their emotions. Make them think a little bit, you know, make them feel that religion. And they did this in what was called a seasonal communion, where they would have great meetings, and basically it was all faiths were invited. And they come in, except Catholics. They weren't too friendly to them in England. And they said, come on in, we're going to have a communion. And then there was a lot of evangelization and sermonizing that told people they better start getting right. And people did. And it changed people's lives. We know people turned their lives around over there. It's documented. We know it one way, the Welsh ponies. Now we say, well, how did that happen? Well, see them old miners that worked down in them mines down in Wales, them coal mines? They took these little ponies and took them down in these tunnels, and they shoveled coal into the wagons, and they bring them back out of there. And see, them miners, every command they made to them horses was a cuss word. Turn left, you old whatever. Turn, you know, and they had to say, turn right now, turn left. Them ponies didn't know without hearing them curse words. They had to reteach their ponies how to turn. That's one. So that's one indication that there was really a change going on. And we had a preacher over here in America named Jonathan Edwards, and he began preaching sermons as well. And he had a sermon called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." That's the actual cover of that, published in 1741. And basically, what that said was, you're going to hell. I mean, everything in it. He had 10 considerations that said God may cast you into hell at any moment. And, you know, the wicked deserve to be cast into hell. I put all them hot colors up there, red, orange, and yellow, so you can see. But basically, these things really actually drove people into the churches at that time. And a lot of this was, you didn't know who was going to get chosen. There was a lot of this predestination. God knew, so you better behave. But there was another preacher over in England. Now his name, he was a short little feller. He was shorter than me. He was about 4 feet 11. I'm half a foot taller than that. But here he was, and people made fun of this feller. His name was George Whitefield. Now over here we called him George Whitfield. The English tended to favor Whitefield. And they said, oh, God only knows what happened to the English language once it crossed the Atlantic. They don't think we talk too good over here. But George, they made fun of him because he was short. So a lot of people made fun of him for that. Other people made fun of him because he suffered from a condition known as strabismus. That meant he was cross-eyed. He'd get out there preaching, and he'd be looking up there, and you'd say, is he looking at him over there, or is he looking at me? And they said, or is he looking off at something in the great beyond that only he can see? But he was cross-eyed, and some people made fun of him for that.
Man.
That's a sketch. But he toured all 13 colonies, and he spoke to congregations, and tens of thousands of people would come and hear him. I mean, he'd have advanced people, just like Jesus did with his disciples, you know. They'd go out and say, you know, George is a-coming. You got to come and listen to this talk. So he was gifted, though he had some infirmities, I guess, or handicaps, but he was gifted with a great big booming voice that just made you run. Some people, when they heard him, just fainted over dead. Some of them got to weeping and crying and begging for God's mercy, and others just run away. They didn't want to hear it. But actually, many people stayed because they wanted to hear what George had to say. Now, preachers and actors envied George Some preachers said, why he could just say the mere word Mesopotamia, and just the way he'd say it would make people bust out bawling. You know? Now, there ain't no real reason to get upset, because that's the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It's a geographical term. But he could say Mesopotamia, and people would cry. That's what some pastors said. Sir David Garrick, an actor, he said, I would give 100 guineas if I could say, oh, like Mr. Whitefield. You know, because he could pull at purse strings. I guess he figured it'd help his acting career. But whatever the thing was, George's loud, dynamic preaching had powerful impacts upon congregations in all of the 13 American colonies. We know this because of all the letters that were written and the stories that were written about him, but also from one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. Now, old Ben was good friends with George. They had dinners together. They talked, but they didn't see eye to eye on religion, because Ben was sort of like Thomas Jefferson and a lot of those enlightened fellers of the day. They believed in God. They believed in what it's now today called deism, that God is a divine clockmaker, and he gets the world all made, and then he winds it up, and it sits back there and lets it play out on its own, tick-tock, tick-tock. Doesn't interfere. He made it. Then we hear all these talks in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence about the Creator, but you don't see much about Jesus Christ in that. And so Ben didn't necessarily see eye to eye with the salvation message of Jesus Christ that George was preaching, but they was good friends. And he would go to a lot of his revivals. At one point he said, I just want to see how loud people can hear. And he'd pace around, and he'd go, you know, and pace around scientifically, because he was real interested in science. And he said, I want to see just how many people can hear him. And he said, I think 30,000 people could have heard him at one time without one of these microphones. So that was something. He also writes about about George's, how powerful his preaching was when he starts talking about giving. Because evidently, when George would get the congregations whooped up into real powerful emotion, he'd say, pass them collection plates. And off they'd go into the crowds, and they'd put their money in. And so then he'd get them up there again, get them all under the emotions, and pass it again. and so finally, during that invitation, when people was coming down and turning their lives over to Jesus, he was saying, pass it one more time, I got them now. Ben writes that. He says, I went there one time, and he said, I reached in my pocket, and I had some coppers, and I thought, well, I'll just pass it around. And it's in his letter, in the Humanities Council of America, the Humanities Center. And he said the next time, said he got really way up there, you know, and everybody was starting to cry and weep. And he said, I reached in there and said, I'll give him my silver. He said finally he finished with a powerful stroke, and he put in his 5 gold pistoles. Now, pistoles were Spanish coins. We didn't have lots of American money back then. We were still paying a lot in shillings and pounds and things like that. So he talks about doing that, and he complains to one of his friends at one of the clubs where they had dinner. He said, I can do better than that. He said, I left all my money at home. He'd done that to me twice. I left it on the sideboard and said I was begging $10 off of somebody to put in a plate when I was there, borrowing $10. So I imagine there's lots of preachers that like to have George preaching on giving Sundays, you know, on stewardship Sundays. But anyway, Kentucky becomes the 15th state, the first state to cross the Appalachians in 1792. And after the War for Independence, people flooded into the states. And the population went sky high. People were making good money. There was land to be had. And lots of preachers were saying, you know, I'm kind of worried about folks. They're going over and enriching their pocketbooks, but they ain't enriching their souls. They're losing their souls going over there. Lots of people saw what Kentucky life was like. And there was a lot of drudgery, as you would see in the book there, Winter's Landing. That they worked day and night, and it became what people call a hog and hominy existence. You were just basically living hand to mouth, and every day was about the same. And people began to realize there's something bigger out there than me. There's something out there that I need to have. And so there were a lot of preachers. The Catholics were calling for a Catholic priest. They just had a diocese put in at Bardstown in 1811. That's another one of those pivotal years. I started doing research, find out all kinds of things going on. But then there were people saying, we need a preacher. And we had some circuit riders, but in the early 1800s, we have revivals down in Kentucky's county today called Logan County. And there at the Red River Meeting House, the Muddy River, and the Gasper River, we had a group called, or brothers called the McGreedy Brothers that had revivals. And they got to preaching, and these revivals got very emotional. People began to weep and cry out. They realized they needed what was called salvation. And so at that point, there was another preacher from way up in Bourbon County by the name of Barton Warren Stone, who preached at the Cane Ridge Meeting House, and he said, I got to go down and get some of that. I want to see what's going on. And after he seen it, he said, I'm having my own in August of 1801. So he started getting all the word out that we're going to have a big revival. It's going to be bigger than the McGreedy Brothers, and everybody's invited. And you'd be surprised how the word traveled back then. People got the word out through what was called the grapevine. And up and down the rivers, you could get tracts and broadsides and newspapers out there. So Barton Warren Stone said he was having one. Now, I was just 17 years old at the time. And I wanted to go down there. Some of my friends said, Ed, you want to go down and see that revival? So, you know, we hear them girls get hysterical first. And I was 17 and I was kind of interested in girls, you know, and I kind of wanted to see what all that was about. So we heard they lost control first. But I thought, oh, I got to get it past my mother. So I went in, I waited till the right time because I was always in trouble. I went in and said, Mother, may I go down to the revival at Cane Ridge? I thought she's going to say no. She goes, no, if there's anybody that needs reviving, it's you. You need to go. So I said, all right, that was easy. So I went out and packed my horse up and bedroll and got my brandy jug. And me and my friends started heading off to Cane Ridge. Now, as we was on the road, we seen all kinds of wagons and horses and all kinds of people on foot carrying back, sacks, knapsacks. What are you doing? And they said, we're going to Cane Ridge. Everybody we asked said they was going to Cane Ridge. And we was coming down from the north. We was up near the Ohio River. And we was heading down toward Lexington, which then was the largest town in Kentucky at 1,797 people. That was our largest town. So we start coming down through there, and we realize there's not going to be just hundreds. There's going to be thousands of people. And we finally get there, and it's on an August night, and we come over the grove, and we hear noises like you couldn't believe. I mean, there was a murmuring. It sounded like the Cumberland Falls. As we got closer, it sounded more like Niagara Falls. The thunder was unbelievable. And we seen preachers up in big podiums. They'd knocked together a platform, and they was up there preaching. 7 of them at one time. There were 17 preachers at Cane Ridge that come there to preach. And 7 of them was going at once, every one of them roaring at the top of their lungs. One had found a tree that had been knocked down by lightning, and he scampered up the trunk and stood in the hollow trunk there and preached from that big old stump so people could see him. He was 15 feet off the ground. We come in there, and we seen all these people under there, and it was absolute chaos. But deacons was lighting the fires, lighting torches, and hanging lanterns and candles from trees. And we got to listening. We put our horses there. We found a place for them. And it was hard to find places for your animals in grazing. Can you imagine what it was like back then? No facilities of modern days. It was unbelievable. But we sat down, we started listening. Now the firelight was coming off the trees. It kind of gave you a primordial feeling, you know. And you got to seeing people's faces distorted. They was all listening. Their eyes was as big as hen eggs. We got to listen to what them preachers was saying about how we had to get right, get clean, and have Jesus in our lives. And all of a sudden, we felt this great burden on us. And before long, you know, we were sitting there, and I got to feeling pretty uncomfortable. And then this girl let out a shriek, like an engine was raising her scalp. And I thought, what was that all about? And looked over there, and she was jerking. She had the jerks in one arm. She tried to stop it. She couldn't stop it. Before long, you know, her legs got to jerking. Before long, she lost complete control and laid down there flopping like a catfish that you throw up on the riverbank after you caught one. You couldn't fight them jerks. The more you fought them, the worse it was. It was really funny because we come to see them girls. They's all dressed up in their starched prunellas and lace and everything, and they got their heads got to jerking. They got to jerking so fast you couldn't make out their facial features. And their hair, their bonnets come loose, you know, and their combs and jeweled combs and stuff. And their hair got to flying around there, cracking like a wagon whip, you know. If you standing next to them, they'd put your eyes out. And, you know, one man, he couldn't fight them. He got to hollering and roaring like a bull caught in a net. So he just said, I'm going to take my jug of whiskey over there on them saplings and just drink them jerks to death. So he uncorks the jug and tries to put that jug to his lips, and as hard as he tried, he could not do it. And he let out a real violent curse, dropped his bottle, his head jerked, people heard his neck snap, and he fell to the ground dead. That's what people wrote. People standing around it. I didn't hear it. I was watching all these people flopping around there. But they did say you couldn't fight them jerks. You had to go with them. Or prayer was about the only cure. Well, if you think that was bad, you think the jerks was bad, you should have seen the fallen exercise. Them preachers would get them all up in the air and people weeping and begging for mercy, and they'd say, fall down. They'd clap their hands. And I seen 500 people go down just like they'd been hit by a battery of buckshot, you know, a cannon. Every one of them down there, eyeballs rolled up in their heads, laying there. They fell on top of each other, on top of stumps and benches. They was tangled up like briars. After you'd been a harrow in your fields, you had to get them all untangled. And some of the bearers of the slain carried them in and laid them out in the cabin itself. And some of them could lay there and they could speak, but they could not move. Others could move, but could not speak. There was one girl, a Kentucky girl named Rachel Martin, that laid there for 9 days. She was 14 years old. And a mother would come up, Pastor, look at my daughter. Is she going to die? He'd pick her hand up. Nope, just give her a spoonful of water every so often. She'll be all right. 9 days later, she come to and said she'd seen the pearly gates and she'd seen Jesus. He told her to go back and tell other people about his love. So that was a powerful, you know, powerful testimony. They even put her up on some guy's shoulders to tell people about it. But this fallen exercise, 1,500 people laying there. You know, that was scary. You can imagine being a parent and having a child like that, unconscious for that many days. Well, if you think the jerks was bad, if you think the fallen exercise was bad, you should have heard them holy laughs. I was standing by this real old man. He's about 88 or 90 years old. And he burst out laughing. I thought, what was that? And before long, everybody got to laughing. And you know how that is. Ain't you ever been somewhere where you try to not laugh? And you know you ain't supposed to? And you bite your knuckle? And it's contagious. And before long, everybody's laughing. It's kind of like them jerks. You couldn't fight them, you just had to go with them. Prayer was about the only cure. Now sometimes them jerks and the laughs and all got connected, and people got to twirling and dancing around. Some of them rolled over and over on the ground just like logs, and it just didn't stop. Others, you couldn't have caught them if you wanted to. They was just leapfrogging around there, cavorting. There was even two big old fat businessmen from Lexington playing leapfrog. It was unbelievable. But people was caught up in in what was called a religious ecstasy. And there's a fella come up to me, he started jib jab, jab, jib jib jab. And I said, what? What you saying? And I thought he was something was wrong with him. And they said, oh no, that's Aramaic, that's Hebrew. I said, that's powerful stuff there, you know. And so they said that he's talking in tongues. A lot of them preachers refer to Cane Ridge, even today, as what's called the day of the second Pentecost. You know, you can find that in Acts, and you can read about it, and what went on, how the Spirit come on people. So if you think all that was bad, the barks, the talking, the speech-making, the falling over, the jerks. Oh, I mentioned the barks. That's right. That was the one that scared me the worst. People got what they called the barks. All of a sudden, this one feller just went down on all fours and said, what's wrong with him? Before long, others was doing it. And the preacher said, go sick him, sick Satan, sick him. And a whole pack of them went off on all fours. And they went over the hills, and finally you'd hear them, he said, oh, he's done treated, the bark changed, he's done treated the devil. And that's what they called it, was treeing the devil back then. Whatever was going on, people were getting caught up. And I went down there to kind of laugh. There were people that went down to disrupt the services, and some of them to scoff. And they said some of them that went down there to scoff ended up barking. Well, they knew something. They were one of the ones chasing. They were going to make fun, but actually it changed people. And it sort of changed me, because I kind of went down there to see them girls, and I got the little daylight scared out of me. They's telling us the end times was a-coming. And you know, I changed. I changed. I was one of them converted that went down and gave my life over to living better and to be a better person and to be a Christian. So that's what I was doing then. And I want to tell you, you know, I look back now, and I know it's kind of terrible to laugh, because we all laugh at people. People are funny. Just look around you. You know, and when you go to different churches, how people do things, you kind of laugh at them a little bit. You know, the first time I went to a Catholic church, this lady out of nowhere started the rosary and Hail Mary, and I didn't expect it, and I jumped out of there like I'd been bayoneted from behind, you know. And some of the things that went on, you tend to laugh at, you know. You go to a Baptist ceremony, there's things they do that's a little different, you know. Everybody's got something different. And we're all ready to tell jokes and ridicule each other. Well, you know, there's enough bad stuff in this world that we ought to be helping each other. If somebody has a spiritual experience, they get closer to God in their way, we ought to be helping them. Not tearing them down. Not telling jokes on people. You know, people like to make fun of what went on at Cane Ridge. They like to explain it away. And say, all them people wasn't having enough food and they went crazy. You know, they were easily swayed. There's something wrong with them, you know, and said they didn't have a lot, and so you didn't have to do much to get them to act like teenagers at a rock concert, you know. So, but there's always people trying to explain away miracles. You know, I've always learned the best way to kill a miracle is to question it. You get a miracle in your life, you better take it and say, thank you, Jesus. I appreciate it. So anyway, you know, I don't like telling jokes, but I have told some Catholic jokes in my time. You know, that one, this ain't true. You know, them statues in there, in them Catholic churches, ain't good Baptists that wandered in there, got curious, and got in there and got frozen for all eternity. That ain't right. They don't wean their babies on beer. You know? And they say that that's a church of idols and incense, statues and beads, smells and bells. They make fun of them. You know? And there's other jokes too, you know. There's some jokes even on Baptists and dancing that I wouldn't tell in mixed company or any company. You know? But I can tell this. All right, there's this feller that died and went to heaven. St. Peter met him at the pearly gates. Said, come on in, boy. You done a good job. You worked hard. You lived a good life, and you believed. And so I'm going to show you some other people that you might not think made it. So they go over this hill, they come down in this valley. These fellers are heaping chickens onto a the racks, you know, and they're smoking chickens and drinking noggins of beer and having a good time. I said, well, who's them? He said, them's the Catholics. They made it. Them's that believe. They go on up a little bit more and they whoop, 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 ow, whoop, whoop. And people running out of the church and back in. He goes, who's them? Them's the holy rollers. They made it. Them's that believe. And let's come on down here. I want you to see these are the Methodists. And this is the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Christ, you know. And all the Lutherans. Them's made it that believe. Be real quiet when you tiptoe past this. Who's them? Them's the Baptists. They think they's the only ones up here. so we got to remember that these people in Cane Ridge, and they come from Ohio, Tennessee, Carolina, North Carolina, and all over Kentucky. And they was looking for something in their lives that was missing. And they found it at Cane Ridge. They found out about the love of Jesus. You know, they found out about heaven and what was going on. They learned there was a Bible that told them how to live. And I seen lives changed. Why, I seen old horse thieves and whoremongers and drunkards and wife beaters and cursers. And all of them turned their lives around. In fact, there are people that come from Kentucky, they've been to Kentucky before and said that's the most lawless, God-forsaken place I've ever seen. And after Cane Ridge, they said, I hardly heard a curse word. One wife writes in a letter to her mother, my husband don't beat me no more. And he is honest in his dealings. And he's not drinking, and he hardly curses at all. So there were some changes in people's lives. And that's what we need to look at and see the importance of what happened at Cane Ridge. At this point, I go out of my character, and I give you a little bit more about Cane Ridge and some facts and figures real quick. There were all walks of lives. People came from all over Kentucky. They were rich, poor, educated, uneducated, different denominations, and even our second governor, a two-term governor, James Garrard, came and walked the whole way. In fact, James Garrard wrote a letter. He wasn't one of those that was slain or fell down, but he experienced weak knees, and his aides had to support him. He felt it, and he writes about it. So you see all this that I was giving you are from documents from people that were there that wrote, like the one that said it was louder than Niagara. He had actually been to Niagara Falls. His name was James Finney, and he was actually a preacher in Ohio. He was called the Lion. He went back to Ohio to preach. And we won't hold that against him. But he came down to Kentucky, got religion, and started preaching. And they call him the Lion of the Forest. So you can read, I've got a bibliography here that you can do some more reading on Cane Ridge. Counted over 147 wagons, converts from other meetings, people from all over central Kentucky, all over, came. And can you imagine, again, the lack of facilities, food, restroom facilities, fresh water. In fact, a lot of people left because their horses were running out of feed. There were all types of people there, again, even vendors said, hey, I think I can take some oats over there and make me some big money. You know, let's take some fresh water. Let's take some, you know, smoked meat, that sort of thing. They do report heat lightning. That added to the drama. You know how heat lightning is in August. And when people saw the lightning flicker, preachers would raise their voices, you know, and get a little louder with that. The darkened groves, again, were really, they were lit with all types of lamps. And you would have seen it, and it would have been a sight to behold. And all of the jerks, and these are different sketches from that period of the types of podiums that were provided for people, and elevating the preacher allowed them to see more, and then they had to rely totally on their voices, no amplification. Again, all types of people. There's some of the diaries right there. Barton Warren Stone, Richard McNemar, James McGreedy, William Burke, William Rogers, James Finley, a young man who experienced conversion there. And he talks about that experience. We have a song that was sung during that time period. Does everybody have a song sheet? we're going to sing one that they said made the flesh tremble. I'm going to play it for you. This was played by my high school kids. They had a band. They played for the Kentucky State Fair. And I asked them to get this together. Does everybody have one? If not, raise your hands. We'll get you one. It's a sort of a song sheet there. It looks like this. But I'll let you hear it. Tell me if you recognize the tune. Okay? These boys are pretty good. What is it?
I can't remember the name, but I recognize
She's
it.
singing it. Come thy fount
Yeah, come thy fount.
of every blessing. It was written in 1757 by an Englishman named Robert Robinson, and he wrote this, and he was only 22 years of age. It crossed the Atlantic and, just like Amazing Grace, took the colonies and the United States by storm. A man in Oglethorpe, Georgia, Thomas Griffin, writes about it in 1808 and said it literally made the flesh tremble. And it was a favorite of some of those brush arbor sermons where they would just, preachers, they would clear out an area of brush and then in a grove and have this ceremony. So let's try to sing it. It starts quick. There's no introduction. Let thy kingdom bless its Savior. Are you ready? We're going to do it with music. Here we go. Let thy kingdom bless its Savior, come and bid our joy cease. Come, oh come and reign forever, God of love and Prince of Peace. This is the Lord we Zion, hear the Lord. Day and night thy rest are crying, come good shepherd, feed thy sheep. We'll do one more. Some for Paul, some for Apollos, some for Cephas, none agree. Jesus said us, hear thee call us, help us, Lord, to follow thee. Then we'll rush through bloody converse, over every in between. Not a terror by force or numbers, come good shepherd, feed thy sheep. Very good. So you have sung one of the old historic songs. Where did I lay? There it is. All right. So that's really neat. Let's see if we can see. Oh yeah. One more. Robert Patterson was one of the earliest settlers in Kentucky. He didn't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. When preachers say, "Oh, I had 300 in service," he might be hopeful and be a little high. This guy did a scientific count. He came up with 12,000 people and 125 wagons. So, you're going to see that in history. But he did go around and interview people and said, I understand you are laying here, you can speak, you were slain. What were you feeling in the moments before? And he took notes, scientific notes of what people's sensations were. And then you take other journals and say what they were feeling. It's all very similar. There's not a lot of difference. But he wrote as much as he could about how long the immobility lasted on him. This is one of the honor rolls of some of the preachers that were there, and some of them have written autobiographies and dedicate chapters to their lives. The estimates, again, will run as low as 10,000 and as high as 30,000. Not all 30,000 were there at one time. Some people just couldn't stay, but others were coming in, and it went on for about a week and a half. So they say, though, the military counters, there were 3 military counters there, and back then your gun had 1 shot. So you needed to know the size of the other army, and they were trained in grouping and counting, and they came up with 30,000. The Cane Ridge people come up with 25,000. Okay, that's sort of an autobiography. I could make that available to you through email if you want, and you can look at that. It did change Kentucky. There is no way you could cut it. Any detractor could not say Kentucky was not changed. The president of Washington College, George Baxter, Presbyterian. And the Presbyterians didn't like all that, you know, emotionalism. And they asked Barton Warren Stone about it. They didn't tell him no, but they frowned on it. Barton Warren Stone and his followers, like Campbell and others, will create their own church, the Springfield Presbytery. And then you'll have Campbellites, and you'll have the Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Christian Church. But they said he just couldn't get over the change. It was a true transformation. And it was old, it came out of, it didn't just happen overnight, it grew out of that Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, the seasonal communion, and they put a lot on having communion at that time. The spiritual changes, that's what we can't begin to look at, because that's here and there. And what goes on here and there, I don't want anybody telling me what's going on with me. I know. You know what I'm saying? And you know. And so don't tell me it's a condition response psychologist. I won't accept it. But these people, again, we saw, all you could see was what went in and then what came out. It's like Skinner's black box theory, you know. You had an output that was different than what went in to that revival. And Cane Ridge today is located in Bourbon County, Kentucky. A Disciples of Christ congregation met there for many, many years, and Barton Warren Stone was its minister before he moved on. The disciples used the log building, and it finally fell into disrepair. And some of it got scattered into nearby barns. The rafters did, and they were used for hay and things like that. This is what it looks like today. When you go in, you've got a sign telling you about the Cane Ridge Meeting House. It was built in 1791, 1 year before we became a state. Well, that's my lovely fiancée who didn't come today. She's teaching and got lesson plans and all that. But that is a stone superstructure outside of the building that protects the log cabin inside, which is the largest known one-room log cabin in the United States. So that's something I learned from the curator. But the stone is beautiful. There I am. Oh, that's crass commercialism. Forgiveness is good for the soul. But I actually went there and met the curator, James Trader, and you walk around the grounds. They're just absolutely beautiful. There's Barton Warren Stone went to Hannibal, Missouri, and came back and is buried on the grounds there now. They just had their last burial there. It was ashes, and that's all they've got. This is sort of some of the surrounding countryside. It's absolutely beautiful. They just cut the hay the day we were there. And the smell of the cut grass was just unbelievable. Can you imagine what it would have been like for people sitting out there and under the trees and in the groves? And they're hallelujah there, brother. But you can imagine in those trees, some of those, I'm sure they weren't there at the time, but their ancestors were. Behind me, you can see the cane, the native cane that Daniel Boone gave Cane Ridge the name. So it still grows there, and I went up there in late autumn. The leaves were falling. The cane is green, and he said it stays green all winter. Kind of gets dark green. But there is a museum. Some of the farm tools that Craig Ridgway, the 21-year-old, uses are there, and just unbelievable. His friend Levi, the one that tells him don't marry that Catholic, he uses the carpentry tools. This is the largest known one-room log cabin. If you go there, take a little donation money. You don't have to, it's not a charge to go. They live on their donations. If you look, here it is inside, and you can see there's 12 points to the cabin. They claim for the 12 disciples. There's some of the cherry railings that are up there. You've got a banister that accesses it, and that's the slave gallery. For years, the slaves, they allowed them to come, but you had to go up a ladder, and then in the ladder you would, they didn't have steps inside. They do now. So that's looking down. They do have a lectern there. There's some more of the building. Again, it's a living church. People meet there. They get married there. They have Easter services there. It is not a state church. It is in Bourbon County. If you left here and got on Highway 64 and went to Lexington and take the Paris Road exit, you're almost there. And there's a sign that takes you out to Cane Ridge. You take your first right out of Paris and then take your first left, and about 6 miles over some of Kentucky's most beautiful land, you'll run into Cane Ridge. And when you're there, you're going to feel an aura. I mean, you're going to feel something went on there. And it's a great place to go. When you go, tell James Trader that Eddie Price sent you. He's had a few buses and tour groups go since I've been. Make sure that you pick up a brochure. They're free. I have to make a little on the book, A Starving Artist. But the Cane Ridge brochure is free. They're in their winter months now. They won't reopen until, I think, April. But do go. Yes, thank you. Question there. Yes.
You know, you see these when I was a kid growing up at Orangeburg High School, called them Holy Rollers. You see them on TV. I saw Jimmy Swaggart a couple of days ago. I'm surfing around on my TV set where the audience participates. Black congregations do this, as distinguished from Catholic or Episcopal being Catholics who flunked their Latin.
Right.
They have these real quiet and sedate homilies or whatnot.
Right.
And these people realized that they needed to get the people involved, and they did.
That was the Second Great Awakening.
And they rolled around on the ground, thus giving them the name Holy Rollers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, the War of 1812 was the extension of the Napoleonic Wars to North America.
Yes, it was.
Like the French and Indian War, it's the same thing.
Exactly. And I have another program that I do on that, on the War of 1812.
Henry Clay, the war hawk, didn't have any, we were told in high school history at Owensboro High that it was over the impressment of seamen. It really was about Henry Clay wanting to run the British out of the rest of North America.
So Canada, they had their eyes on Western states and Western representation, to beat the Federalists. Yeah.
Very good. The kids of Hancock County are lucky to have you as a teacher.
Well, they were, I guess. I mean, I've retired 3 years ago and do this, but I saw a hand up here. The young
Terry?
lady here, yeah.
Terry?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to say I think that I am in this room the representative of this region, and I'm a direct descendant basically of this Second Great Awakening. Mm-hmm. My mother was born in North Middletown in Bourbon County. And raised in Montgomery County. My grandfather was a tenant farmer, and so they moved a little bit. She was raised in Montgomery County, but I was also raised in the Disciples of Christ denomination, and my uncle still is a member of the Church of Christ, and they still have camp meeting. My uncles still help with camp meeting right in that same region, so that's sort of living history still. So.
Yes.
Well, I grew up in a non-instrumental, non-denominational Church of Christ, which is a cousin of the Disciples of Christ. And what strikes me is it all came out of the same root, but the Christian church, well, I shouldn't speak for them, the Church of Christ are expressly against those direct operation of the Holy Spirit things where people bark and fall on the floor because they don't believe the Holy Spirit operates that way, yet that whole movement came out of that. It's kind of weird.
I won't get into the denominational differences anymore. I can't. Yes.
I've read quite a bit about that meeting at Logan County on the Gasper River, and the author said that there was more sinning going on than there was salvation.
I didn't want to bring that in. There was an epidemic of births. 9 months later,
I was going to say, it seems like in the summer all the kids want to go to rock festivals, and it seems like the same kind of thing. They're going there when they go. They are going for the revelry, and they say peace and love, and they're all getting along, and they share their food, and so it sounds like similar to the Cane Ridge thing to me.
Some psychiatrists try to draw, correlations there. Yes.
Well, the whole thing with services now, what do they call them? They're not traditional services.
Contemporary.
Service. I mean, it's the same thing. Everybody gets up and,
Yeah.
Or Christian rock concerts.
The third awakening going on.
Letting you know.
It's participation, they're
Right.
involved in the action.
My grandfather was what you would call a Pentecostal Brush Harbor tent meeting, traveling preacher in Kentucky, Tennessee, and the lower parts of Indiana and Illinois. I'm almost a second generation or a third generation, I guess you'd say, of the traveling church, if y'all get my drift of us bringing the stuff to the church and everything. But I have been in his brush harbors when I was a child, and I have seen the slaying of the spirit. I've seen the slithering. I have seen all of what you've talked about, and I have also heard him reference the Cane Ridge revival. And people even in the 1940s here in Davis and McLean County referenced this event that happened, and they heard about it from their grandfathers and their grandmothers or great-grandfathers and grandmothers that experienced it. So I can't explain what all of that is, but
Few
I
people
know I
can.
have witnessed it, and there is a feeling that you cannot explain when you have actually seen it.
He talks about, he says it has the greatest, in my book, I have the Brush Arbor sermon, and he says it's got the greatest scientific of the minds in the world, crawling on their bellies like reptiles, and slithering. And
Yes.
people ask me, he said, did all that stuff really happen? I said, yes, it happened. I mean, I did the research on Cane Ridge, but then weaving it into a story where this young man experienced, that's just one part of the book. Religion's not it's a continual thread throughout the book, but because he comes in contact with different ones. But who could explain that? You just go on. Yeah.
This has really opened my eyes because I'm not from Kentucky. I'm from Oregon, way out on the left coast, as they call it. And I've been in Kentucky now for 6-7 years, and I have never seen such religious fervor. I mean, there's a church on every corner here in Owensboro, all kinds of different Baptist churches and all that, and that was really